Okay, Jazakallah khair for the very kind invitation by SIO to deliver another talk to you all as part of this Ufuq Science and Technology Fest. It was very interesting when I was looking at the term Ufuq. I mean, we find this in the Quran, at least in the plural, in relation to the afaq, right? The horizons. So maybe this talk will speak to that title of your event, your fest, in relation to a story that I'm going to try to tell to inform the horizons of this particular festival that you're putting together. So, as Faiz has rightly pointed out, the title of my talk is From Pax Romana to Pax Silica. And I just want to dive straight into it because of, we need to think about time really. So, what is Pax Silica, right? Well, uh, on the 12th of December 2025, US Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, Jacob Hellberg, convened the inaugural Pax Silica Summit, marking the beginning of what was described as, and I quote, a new golden era of cooperation on AI and supply chain security, end of quote. The latter spanning from, and I quote, critical minerals and energy inputs to advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, AI infrastructure, and logistics, end of quote. Emphasized in the fact sheet on the US state government website was a commitment to, and I quote once again, ensure aligned nations can develop and deploy transformative technologies at scale. In this connection, and as a clear indicator of such alignment, the summit included stakeholders from Japan, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Australia, with guest contributions from Taiwan, the European Union, Canada, and the OECD. Although described as and I'm quoting again, a new economic security paradigm, and the emphasis here being on new, the Pax Silica initiative clearly has ties to predecessor formations as indicated by it being, and I quote again, about coordinating with partners who want to remain competitive and prosperous. Key concerns are expressed in terms of growth, resilience, innovation, security, durability, scalability, prosperity, and an emerging, in quotes, geopolitical consensus that economic security is national security and national security is economic security. In thinking about predecessor formations in geopolitical terms, it is crucial to pay attention to what might be described as the politics of naming. In this connection, a section entitled, and again it's on the fact sheet, the meaning behind the name states the following. Pax Silica draws from the Latin pax, meaning peace, stability, and long-term prosperity, as seen in terms like Pax Americana and Pax Romana. Silica refers to the compound that is refined into silicon, one of the chemical elements foundational to the computer chips that enable artificial intelligence, or AI. Now, the timeline graphic that I've displayed in this slide shows all three such Pax formations, along with one that isn't mentioned in the US government fact sheet, specifically Pax Britannica. Briefly, the latter refers to that historical period between Napoleon's defeat and the First World War, during which the British Empire managed global affairs and where government and industry interests were closely aligned. Crucially, a few people in the center of the Pax made decisions about the development of opportunities at and in the periphery. Here, I want to draw attention to 2 points relating to how the Pax Silica is framed. First, that there is no reference to justice in the above framing of what is meant by Pax. Remember, it refers to peace, stability, cooperation, etc. There's no reference to justice there. And second, that a line is drawn from Pax Americana back to Pax Romana, Pax Britannica being conspicuously absent, perhaps with a view to obscuring the longue durée Euro-American imperial and colonial entanglements associated with the term. On this basis, I should like to argue for a certain continuity, rhetorical and/or otherwise, in the genealogy of the Pax Silica, a genealogy that I suggest is usefully thought about in terms of what I have elsewhere described as algorithmic racism. That is, racialization as a historically iterative process of white supremacist race-making. Yet even if one accepts this racial algorithmic reading of the Pax Silica and its predecessor formations, a reading that is offered with a view to drawing attention to continuity through change, it is crucial to note the absence, perhaps the elision or the erasure of other colonial formations, including those revolving around religion, viz. The Pax Dei or peace of God, and race, viz. What might be described as the Pax Europa, the latter of which tends to be traced by decolonial scholars to the Colombian voyages of conquest initiated in 1492 of the Common Era. Crucially, the expansion and consolidation of the Eurocentric modern colonial world system needs to be understood as entangled with developments internal to Europe, including the Treaty of Westphalia in the 17th century, 1648 of the Common Era, which is the origin of the nation state and to which can be traced the founding of the international system. Yet tracing the modern colonial world system to 1492 of the Common Era and the Colombian voyages of conquest is problematic insofar as it obscures what might be referred to as the template for such colonizing ventures, viz. The Crusades launched in the 11th century, 1095 of the Common Era. According to Slovenian historian Tomaž Masnak, as an ideal and as a movement, the Crusades had a deep, crucial influence on the formation of Western civilization, shaping culture, ideas, and institutions. The Crusades set a model for expansionist campaigns against non-Europeans and non-Christians in all parts of the world. The ideas, iconography, and discourse associated with the Crusades made a profound imprint on all Christian thinking about sacred violence and exercised influence long after the end of actual crusading. They continued to play a prominent role in European politics and political imagination. In fact, the crusading spirit has survived through modernity well into our own postmodern age. Now, although the onset of the Pax Dei or peace of God precedes the launching of the Crusades, the importance of the latter in terms of enhancing the peace and stability of European Christendom through the externalization of violence onto the other should not be underestimated. But who is this other? In this connection, Masnak maintains that, and I quote, Europe as a unity that emerged from Christendom and developed a collective identity and the ability to orchestrate action was, as a rule, articulated in relation to Muslims as the enemy. Crucially, European identity was formed not by Islam, but predominantly in the relationship to Islam. In short, and as the subtitle of his book, Crusading Peace from 2002 suggests, there is a need to think about Western political order in terms of Christendom and its relations with what some refer to as the Muslim world. However, drawing on David F. Noble's seminal work, The Religion of Technology from 1997, I suggest that alongside and entangled with the Crusades, there is a need to appreciate that since its rise in medieval monasteries in the 13th century onwards, technology has been implicated in two main ways. Firstly, the Christian desire to restore humanity to the perfection of Adam prior to his alleged fall, and secondly, the millenarian struggle between Jesus and the forces of evil that will inaugurate the eternal heavenly kingdom. In short, technology has been presumed as necessary for war against the Antichrist. Now, this is important since, as I have argued elsewhere, Western crusading, and it is crucial to appreciate that Columbus held such an orientation, Western crusading has been underpinned by a view of Islam and figures within Islam as both heretical and a prefiguration of the Antichrist. Now let's return to the history of Pax. This brings me back to the Pax Silica by way of two earlier, yet arguably related developments, viz., the so-called War on Terror, essentially a global war on Muslims initiated after the events of 9/11, and the Pax Technica, the latter of which was set out a decade ago in a book bearing the same name, authored by Philip N. Howard, a professor of sociology, information, and international affairs based at the UK Oxford University. In what follows, I offer a critical exploration of some aspects of the Pax Technica, what it is, how it works, and how it offers a way into thinking about the Pax Silica, notwithstanding certain differences between the two formations, which have to do with the absence of reference to AI in the Pax Technica and the arguable centrality of AI in the Pax Silica. I'll conclude my presentation by returning to the Pax Silica and point to what I think needs to be done by way of mounting a response to this emerging order. Just to let the organizers know that I think somebody might have their microphone on, because I'm hearing some communication over the top of the presentation. Thank you for fixing that. Okay. So what is the Pax Technica? Well, Howard offers a definition. He describes it as, and I quote, a political, economic, and cultural arrangement of social institutions and network devices in which government and industry are tightly bound in mutual defense pacts, design collaborations, standard setting, and data mining. And data mining we should think about really as anticipating what is today the focus of the Pax Silica in relation to AI technologies and their entanglement with global supply chains. Now, according to Howard, he maintains, and remember, he's arguing this a decade ago in 2015. So this is before the emergence of large language models, deep learning, ChatGPT, and the related cluster of technologies that is, has the internet abuzz and is the focus of so much of our attention. So back in 2015, when he was writing the Pax Technica, he argued the following. He said, "We are entering a period of global political life I call the Pax Technica. I've coined this pseudo-Latin term to capture my broad theory that the rapidly increasing diffusion of device networks is going to bring about a special kind of stability in global politics, revealing a pact between big technology firms and government and introducing a new world order. Crucially, in contrast to the invocation of peace in the Pax Silica fact sheet on the US government website, Howard goes on to state the following. As with the Pax Romana, the Pax Britannica, and the Pax Americana, the Pax Technica is not about peace. Instead, it is about the stability and predictability of political machinations that comes from having extensively networked devices. In short, in addition to recognizing the absence of reference to justice, there is a need to think here in terms of the entanglement of Pax formations, including the Pax Silica, with the maintenance, expansion, and refinement of war. Now, regarding the relationship between Pax formations and New World Orders, Howard also maintains the following. New World Orders have been given the label of Pax, an epoch of predictable stability based on known rules and expectations. The Internet of Things is establishing a new Pax, notwithstanding the fact that the Internet isn't quite a country, a superpower, or an empire. But what is the Internet of Things? Well, according to Howard, the way to think about the Internet of Things, and it's a pretty standard definition, it refers to devices with small power supplies, embedded sensors, and addresses on the internet. And he argued that by 2020, the world will have almost 8 billion people and around 30 billion devices. And that prediction is pretty decent because I think we're around 8.3 billion people and between 27 to 30 billion devices currently in 2025. He also maintains that the Internet of Things, at least according to him, is the most powerful political tool ever created, right? And he refers to things like political affordances through government corporate alignment or infrastructure. What will power mean in this new world order? Well, it has to do with the skill to manipulate the Internet of Things. And that he maintains that the IoT is only going to make big data gargantuan, i.e., monstrous, massive in scale. But what I found really interesting here was his reference to what he described as the need for a new social science of socio-technical systems, and that researchers need to be trained to see the world as a system of relationships between and among people and devices. Going further, he maintains that the reason we need a rapid turnover in the social sciences is that so many people have been trained to see categories that will have much less significance to the networks of devices in which we will be embedded. Moreover, the political and economic sciences have a well-evolved language for studying markets, classes, and nation states that, according to him, is quickly becoming obsolete. Now, from a decolonial and race critical perspective, I would suggest that Howard's argument is sound for thinking about the rise of the Pax Technica, but only in relation to Westphalian neoliberal capitalism. In short, his framing obscures, intentionally or otherwise, the longue durée persistence and what I refer to as algorithmic reiteration of racial colonialism that I referred to earlier, including in its racialized neoliberal form. And regarding neoliberalism, I think it's worth noting, I mean, and this is a quote again from Howard in 2015, that in 2010, i.e., 5 years earlier, Google CEO Eric Schmidt and the US State Department's tech evangelist Jed Cohen argued in the journal Foreign Affairs that global politics was in for a thorough digital disruption. They urged a strong set of alliances between Western governments and global technology firms. And this, they said, was going to be the best strategy for ensuring that information infrastructure will be put to work for liberal values. So this idea of move fast and break things associated with Silicon Valley that we're so familiar with today, this actually has a much earlier kind of genealogy and precedent, at least going back 15 years, if not much longer. But regarding liberalism, it's worth noting that Eric Schmidt, yes, he was CEO of Google from 2001 to 2011, but he was also appointed chair of a new advisory board for the US Department of Defense, titled the Defense Innovation Advisory Board in 2016. And he was the first chair of the US National Security Commission on AI in 2018. In 2021, Schmidt co-authored The Age of AI and Our Human Future with former US foreign policy advisor Henry Kissinger and computer scientist Daniel Peter Huttenlocher. Crucially, Schmidt is an advocate for open networks, an issue that I would like to briefly explore from a critical perspective in my next slide. So what does openness mean? Well, really, it's just about device interoperability, right? So in other words, that devices should be connected together and have protocols, technical protocols and social protocols and socio-technical protocols that enable different devices to communicate with each other in some form of interoperable fashion, right? So here's an advocacy within if you like, the Pax Technica, and Howard endorses this for openness, device interoperability against what he sees as closure, right? And Howard maintains that crowdsourcing and altruism flourish in open societies with open device networks, right? So what are these open societies? Well, as should be obvious, it refers to Western societies and Western alliance societies, right? And he contrasts this by saying that as device networks spread, civic initiative will always have more positive impacts in open societies. Authoritarian societies, and you have to read the book to understand what he's pointing to when he uses that phrase, and it's specifically China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, etc. These are structurally prevented from making use of people's goodwill and altruism in the bounded device networks of an authoritarian regime. Crowdsourcing initiatives are likely to generate or create negative feedback loops, and big data initiatives are likely to generate misinformation about the actual conditions of public life. And regarding openness, Howard maintains that, and I quote, competing networks exist in several forms, and to make this socio-technical system function fairly, we need to work to strengthen the information infrastructures that have the most open standards, the widest reach, and the greatest potential for innovation, end of quote. But from a decolonial and race critical perspective, beyond the rather stark Orientalism at work here in reference to these authoritarian societies, and I'm not suggesting, right, that they are not authoritarian, but it's just very interesting that only these non-European or non-European descent societies are flagged as authoritarian in his framing. So beyond the decolonial and race critical perspective, drawing attention to the rather stark Orientalism at work here, Howard's framing obscures what has been referred to as the global digital divide in terms of differential access and capacity to harness compute power in relation to the big data generated by the aforementioned Internet of Things. Put simply, Howard's reference to fairness obscures world systemic power asymmetries, not to mention the desirability of committing to compensatory action in favor of those located at the historical margins, peripheries, and borders of the modern colonial world system due to the detrimental impacts of historical colonialism. Okay, so just briefly on the matter of Orientalism, and notwithstanding China's oppression of Uyghur Muslims in East Turkestan, it's important to attend to Howard's contrasting the particularity of China's engagement with the internet and the Internet of Things, with the claimed universality of the Pax Technica. This is important in terms of China's rise as an economic and geopolitical power, and arguably anticipates how more recent discourse about the AI arms race is framed by Western commentators. Now, notwithstanding the critique of Huntington's civilizational essentialism, which I'll get to in a moment, it's really very interesting that Howard makes reference to Samuel Huntington in his book, Pax Technica. And he says the following: Samuel Huntington famously divided the world into 9 competing political ideologies and described these as largely irreconcilable worldviews that were destined to clash. What is more likely in a world of pervasive sensors and network devices, according to Howard, is a competition among device networks. The most important clash, on his view, will be between the people and devices that push for open and interoperable networks and those who work for closed networks. And he goes on to say elsewhere, the critical rivalry in the years ahead will not be between countries, but between technical systems that countries choose to defend. Rival information infrastructure is the single most important long-term threat to international stability. The empire of the Western-inspired, but now truly global internet isn't the only major system in which political values and information infrastructures are deeply entwined. Now, again, notwithstanding the critique of Huntington's civilizational essentialism made by a variety of scholars, including the late Edward Said, I maintain that by framing the clash thesis in terms of political ideologies, Howard obscures the historically sedimented, longue durée, constitutive, and antagonistic relationship between the West and the rest to which I earlier drew our attention. On this basis, I suggest that his focus on technology, more specifically device networks, functions to obfuscate the historical backdrop informing present and future socio-technical realities. And this is rather ironic, given Howard's conceptualization of the Pax Technica as a socio-technical system and his reference to nation states, polities, and governments as themselves needing to be thought of as socio-technical systems, not representative systems. And in relation to Samuel Huntington, I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention that the Zionist Alexander Karp, the co-founder with the Antichrist fixated Peter Thiel of the company Palantir Technologies Incorporated, engages positively with Huntington's clash thesis in his co-authored book published earlier this year entitled The Technological Republic: Hard Power, Soft Power, and the Future of the West. For those who don't know, and I'm not sure that is anyone on this call, Palantir Technologies Incorporated is an American publicly traded company that develops data integration and analytics platforms enabling government agencies, militaries, and corporations to combine and analyze data from multiple sources. And crucially, in January 2024, that's January of last year, Palantir agreed to a strategic partnership with the IDF, or rather the Israeli Occupation Force, the IOF, providing the latter with services to assist its war-related missions, i.e. ongoing settler colonial genocide of the Palestinians. But time is pressing on, so let me conclude by forwarding from 2015 and the Pax Technica to the present, returning to the Pax Silica and looking at it in slightly greater detail with a view to understanding what it is, how it works, and what is to be done. And here I draw on some very useful information provided by a Belgian think tank, and the source is provided at the bottom of the following slides. So first of all, and to summarize, Pax Silica is a strategic coalition designed to protect the silicon stack from critical mineral mines all the way through to frontier AI models. It represents a new era of economic statecraft where supply chain security is considered national security. And it's driven by at least two concerns. One is a strategic choke point, the primary catalyst for Pax Silica being the extreme concentration of critical mineral refining in China, and an infrastructural challenge. Building the Pax Silica requires overcoming two massive physical hurdles. Firstly, the concentration of advanced chip manufacturing in Taiwan, and secondly, the exploding energy demand of AI data centers. Now, according to the same Belgian think tank, the Pax Silica is based on 8 pillars, and they include critical minerals, energy, semiconductors, compute infrastructure, connectivity, advanced manufacturing, logistics, and foundational models. And that's where the AI specifically centers. And as we will see on the next slide, responsibility for each of these 8 pillars is distributed across various countries in the Pax Silica coalition. So this brings us to what might be described as the Pax Silica Alliance, which involves bringing together nations that host the world's most advanced technology companies and resources to build a trusted ecosystem. And they include, and it's important to appreciate that it's only 8 countries which have specific roles in the Pax Silica Alliance. Let me focus on 2 of them. Firstly, the United States as hegemon, which assumes leadership and AI roles as coalition architect. That is, the sovereign power structuring the Pax Silica formation and, crucially, assigning other roles in the coalition, but also the US hegemon as the developer of these AI frontier models, so cutting edge AI, large language models based on the transformer architecture and possibly new emerging architectures. But also Israel's role, which is interestingly flagged as innovation to do with chip design, cybersecurity, and AI software. In this connection, it is important to think about the Zionist settler colonial proxy, or what I would refer to as global white supremacy, in relation to what Australian investigative journalist Anthony Lowenstein refers to as the Palestine Laboratory. That is, Israel's use of the occupied Palestinian territories as a testing ground for surveillance technologies, weapons, and population control systems, which are then exported for deployment globally. But it's also interesting that although there are 11 members of the coalition, the Pax Silica coalition, only 8 are included in the alliance. 3 countries in the coalition that are not included in the alliance include Great Britain, Europe. Well, Europe is more than a country, it's a continent, and Canada. But crucially, we are all talking here about European and or Euro descent partners in the coalition. And this brings me, I guess, to my conclusion and my final slide. And that's the question of what is to be done in relation to this recent development, which I'm suggesting can only sensibly be understood in relation to a long durée series of iterations of previous phenomena, specifically Pax formations, which I suggest also need to be understood as preserving a continuity through change. Well, I'll offer 5 suggestions. Firstly, the importance, and interestingly, this is shared by Howard, is that we shift focus from a sociological or a technological, and by here I mean an exclusively sociological or exclusively technological perspective, to a critical socio-technical frame, right? But this doesn't mean that we should ignore sociological and or technological perspectives. It just means that we need to have a more encompassing frame within which to situate the important insights from these two
Yeah,
of critical
udane.
engagement. Secondly, I suggest we think in terms of the entanglement of political economy, which I suggest we think about in relation to issues of labor and exploitation, with political ecology, and we think about that in terms of resources and extraction of said resources, and political theology, right? Which I suggest we think about less in terms of, in quotes, religion, and more in terms of some form of hierarchical ordering of the world and the elimination and targeting of certain populations as considered surplus to requirements, exterminable and or capable of being destroyed, literally. I also suggest, thirdly, that we pay attention to what I previously mentioned are these long durée reiterative formations or packs and or other related phenomena. And in my work, it's presented in a series of papers, but 3 that I would refer you to are a journal paper I published in 2019, another one I published in 2024, and a book chapter from 2021, is this idea I've been trying to develop, which is a framework for thinking about race or racialization, specifically in kind of algorithmic or procedural terms. And you can find more details about that if you're interested in those publications. Fourthly, know who your friends and who your enemies are when thinking about strategic alliances. And this is going to be decisive in the coming years. And finally, I suggest we start preparing for what some describe as a Butlerian jihad. In other words, a struggle against what I'm suggesting is not a technological enemy, but a socio-technical enemy. And I've written about this in my most recent published journal paper, published in Reorient Journal earlier this year. I'll stop there and inshallah we can open the floor for questions. Jazakallah khairan for your attention. I'll stop my share now, if that's okay.
Uh, Thank you, Mustafa Ali. So the platform is open for the question. If anybody having any question, suggestion, or any inquiry, you can have that.
Um, I have a question. So, yeah, when you say algorithmic racism from a socio-technical frame, you know, how, I mean, my question is, how do we, define the actor in this? Like, we have IoT. IoT is a very distributed system, which is not, a centralized system. The only things, which are centralized are, the internet that is managed by the servers or big MNCs or companies and all that. But all the other things are actually very decentralized. So how do we define this, algorithmic racism in a decentralized tech frame from a socio-technical perspective?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. I mean, that was a really excellent question. I want to thank you for that. So, I mean, if you take my, if you accept my premise that we shouldn't think about computing as something that's technical, but rather we should think of it as always initially already socio-technical, right? And we can extract from the socio-technical the technical and the social. We can strip them out and partition them, if you like, or abstract away from them. But the entanglement is always already there, right? We're dealing with a socio-technical assemblage. And I try to point in relation to the IoT, at least a few issues that maybe we might want to focus on. And they have to do with things like the standards and the protocols that enable these devices to communicate with each other, right? And sure, they're communicating with each other, but it's not as if these standards were, if you like, auto-originated by the devices themselves, right? I mean, these are artifacts, these are devices, these are technologies that have been developed by stakeholders, players, whether we're talking about designers, computer engineers, whether we're talking about developers, whether we're talking about policy analysts and the people who establish and regulate the standards and the protocols, right? And various kind of consortia that oversee this, whether unilaterally, multilaterally, etc., right? But you've also pointed to the distributed nature, and I think that the problem with engaging with decentralization, or perhaps rather than decentralization, distribution is a better way of thinking about the IoT, insofar as although the structure of the internet and the IoT is not centralized, right? It's not centralized. It's not completely decentralized. It's not like a network that doesn't have, if you like, what we might call hubs or points of clustering and more peripheral nodes in the network, right? So nodes are differentially positioned relative to other nodes. So understanding the cartography of the network is really very important in terms of how it was established initially, at least how it grew. And so gaining some kind of historical understanding of the trajectory of the development of both the internet and the IoT is really important, because network effects, right? So preferential attachment, what some refer to as a winner-take-all strategy, wherein early entrants into the network space are able to kind of, as it were, almost define the topology in terms of the dominant topology within the overall network space. That becomes really important, right? So I'm suggesting that if we do that kind of genealogical work, that cartographic mapping, both historically and geographically, we are going to find exactly the same actors doing this establishment work, right? At least in the initiation of some of these network spaces. And those, I would suggest, are essentially Western actors, right? And I'm taking a bad faith reading of Western actors because they want to give themselves a reading that suggests that, they have well-intentioned views that, yes, the technology was Western originated, but it's for the benefit of all. That is obscuring the political economy, political ecology, and political theology of the network, its racialized nature, its entanglements with colonialism, its furtherance of racial capitalism, its exploitative, extractivist, and in some instances, exterminatory role. So I'm not sure that answers your question, and I mean, please do come back if you think that my explanation, or at least the way I'm thinking about this, isn't satisfactory to you. But I'm suggesting that even though the IoT is positioned, right, as device-to-device interaction, that is actually obscuring what even Howard himself is pointing to in terms of these socio-technical, not just context, but entanglements and operations and control and ownership of these devices, and how they can be differentially used in order to further certain projects by certain actors as opposed to other actors. Sorry, that was a very long answer to a relatively short question, but inshallah, I hope it's offered something of value to you. If you want to come back, if you disagree or whatever, I'm very happy to have some kind of debate about this, right?
Yeah, thank you. That answer actually, I take it and I see value in it. But the things I have, concerns is how we treat, the whole thing as an entity. How we say that we instead of just deconstructing it and finding values within it and trying to make equations with that, we consider the whole thing as one entity having certain values, and having that. So yeah, I mean, this is a discussion that can go on for a very long time. So but yeah, that answer is actually, yeah,
But
I
no, no, but yeah, but I'd like to continue with your point you've just made here. I mean, if others will permit us, right? Because I think you've raised a really extremely important point, and that is that, okay, even if you accept my story, because I'm telling a story here, right? Right? Even if you accept my story, if I understand you correctly, you're kind of arguing, well, okay, even if this story is largely true, what can we do within the Internet of Things? Would that be right? Do I have
yeah,
that right?
right, yeah, yeah,
Right. Right. So let's just park the IoT for a moment, if I can, right? If we just agree, let's just agree that we're going to forget about the IoT for a moment. Let's even forget about the internet for a moment, right? And let's just say we're in the modern colonial world system, right? That's Western dominated. They're the hegemon. They set the trade rules. They extract the resources, right? So then the question is, what do we do within that, right? And we could have lots of answers to that. One could be, well, let's seek our place within it. We accept we're subalternized. We accept that we are othered. We accept that we are not dominant. We're not hegemonic. We're subordinate. We're subalternized, whatever. But let's find our place within it, right? I mean, that's one possible answer, but that's not the one that I am particularly happy to offer. The one I'm offering is a decolonial, oppositional, jihadist position, which is we should resist this hegemonic project because it is underpinned by racial colonialism. And I see racial colonialism as fundamentally oppressive on every register possible. Economically, ecologically, so thinking both in terms of like, human political economic relations, but also thinking about the wider Earth system, if you like, the ard, if you want to use that kind of language, but also a samawati wal ard, right? The heavens and the earth, the entire cosmos, because they don't want to stop with the earth. They want to mine asteroids and extraterrestrial sphere for resources for this project, right? I mean, if you Google this stuff, you'll find out about this, right? But even beyond the political economic and the political ecological, there's the political theological. I see this as an affront as a Muslim, I see this as an affront to Tawheed, right? To the idea that La ilaha illallah, right? I see this as an affront to the idea that there is nothing akbar to Allah, right? So if there is any system that wants to claim that it is supreme, ala, right? The highest, that's got to be opposed, right? So this might seem a very kind of extreme, kind of bold or position, but that's the way I'm thinking about this. I don't know if that clarifies things somewhat.
yeah, yeah, it does. But my problem is with negating this thing. So not just IoT. So if we consider Web3, it's transparent. It's again distributed, or not very centralized. I mean, it's partly centralized, but again. So my question is, why are we just thinking about a complete, or are we here thinking about a very complete alternate system? Okay, why are we not thinking about using the same pillars and systems to build a very decolonial, or I don't know how to term it, but
Right, right, right.
what,
So,
what
so,
would I
so,
for that?
yeah. Would I be right in thinking that where you're going with this line of argument is that, um, I'm painting a kind of anti-tech kind of position. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and not really anti-tech, but whatever we do have now, yeah,
Right,
that,
right,
yeah.
right. Okay, so in principle, I think it is possible to at least argue that the internet and the IoT and Web3 and AI, not in its large language and big data driven incarnation, but maybe in a small language, restricted kind of configuration, that potentially could be used for decolonial, liberatory, egalitarian, race critical purposes, right? So I'm not anti-tech per se, right? But what I'm suggesting is that is not the dominant form of this technology today. And our energies, I suggest, at least this is the argument I'm making. I mean, I'm not suggesting you have to agree or even be persuaded, right? But I'm trying to argue that if not your energies, at least somebody's energies should be invested in tackling this hegemonic structure. Because decolonial interventions can't just be about finding our place within a colonial system. It has to be more than that. It has to be about, I suggest, dismantling that colonial system.
Yep, understood. Agreed. Totally agreed. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Does anyone else want to come in? I mean, Amin has asked a series of brilliant questions, but please, others jump in. Just feel free to jump in. It's gone very quiet.
I hope there will be some question. There will be time for one more question. So we are running a bit late. So we'll wait for a minute. If there is no question, we will conclude the session.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. I can ask a question.
Yes, please.
I kind of missed the beginning of the session, but from the discussion and the question and answer with Amin, I do want to ask if you kind of portray the current tech atmosphere being dominant by Western forces, in one way or another, Web3 or like decentralized technology that's emerging rapidly right now is kind of replacing that, right? I mean, in case of IoTs, there is DeepIn, which is like decentralized infrastructure networks, which are like kind of replacing this. So where they give the ownership to the people that use it instead of giving up an ownership to anyone. So there's literally no centralization. So I don't know about DeepIn, but digital like cryptocurrencies has to an extent become really successful in doing this. You can see Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all becoming like super big, like bigger than any other fiat currencies. So do you think cryptographically built states or like systems, just like how we build currencies, would actually be a solution to the problems or the fears that we talk about right now?
Okay, Jazakallah khair for the question. I'm just going to plead ignorance that I don't have sufficient understanding of kind of Bitcoin and related technologies. One thing I have been made aware of is the huge resource strain in terms of electricity use through data centers associated with the use of these cryptocurrencies, right? And I've heard lots of arguments pro and against their use and in relation to, a successor to existing fiat currencies, etc. But at least from my perspective, I want to think about this in relation to what I call the three politicals, right? So the economic, which I guess does speak directly to the issue of this alternate fiat currency of cryptocurrency, but also the ecological, right? The resource depletion associated with anything that's powered by vast data servers and compute power in order to generate cryptocurrency. And maybe to a lesser extent, but also important to think about this politically, theologically, right? In terms of the ordering and early entrance to the markets in terms of these cryptocurrencies, because I think the same network effects they keep playing out in all of these different network-enabled spaces, right? So whether it was the Internet of Things, whether it's a successor to that in Web 3.0, whether it's some kind of cryptocurrency or related blockchain type technology, these network effects, because we are dealing with network phenomena, right? Irrespective of whether we're talking about the physical network itself, whether we're talking about various higher layers in the network stack, all of them are open to network effects, right? So preferential attachment, winner come all, early entrance into the space effects. So, I mean, I'll defer to you as maybe an expert in this area, and I can't claim expertise, right? So maybe what I'm saying isn't convincing, but this is how I think about these kind of issues, right? That again, just to reiterate the point that I was making to Amin in his line of questioning, this isn't about a kind of dismissal or kind of blanket rejection per se of technology. It's more about a critical interrogation of specific technologies and seeing how they are entangled with a wider socio-technical assemblage and fabric, and thinking about this in the what I'm suggesting should be the long durée terms of a reiteration of political, economic, theological, cultural, civilizational domination, right? So it's that kind of argument I'm trying to make. An argument fundamentally is rhetorical, right? I'm trying to persuade people of the need to move away from thinking either sociologically or technically and thinking socio-technically. So always keeping these other concerns at the forefront when we engage with any potential technical solutions to do work for resistant and subalternized populations. Samad, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the best I could offer by way of a response to an important question. So Jazakallah khair for it.
Okay. I hope we could conclude this session. So, as we are running out of time, so it has been a wonderful session. We know he has been delivering a fresh point in certain issues, but particularly towards Pax Silica. So, for concluding the session and for the vote of thanks, I would like to welcome Afkas for giving the vote of thanks.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I take this opportunity on behalf of the organizing committee to express our sincere gratitude, first and foremost, to our guest, Syed Mustafa Ali Sahib, and to all those who have contributed to the success of today's program. The session with our guests' insights with regards to the decolonial as well as critical engagement with the idea of Pax Silica and its continuity and relation with earlier historical formations of domination. It has surely offered us insights which welcomed us or which directed us towards a radical rethinking about many of our fundamental concepts with regard to technology, the new world order, and to direct our current notions of our understanding of ourselves as well as the world as a whole. We thank all the participants for their enthusiastic presence, engagement, and thoughtful attention, which truly brought this program into a lively, interactive session. And finally, once again, we thank Syed Mustafa Ali Sahib for his dying effort and his dedication, commitment, for the betterment of this session. Jazakallah khair. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. عفوا. جزاك الله خير.